Today we have the Lax'yip Firekeepers with us. So that's land defense efforts in BC. And we have Shaylynn Sampson with us, who is a Gitxsan land defender from the Lax'yip, which is the Wolf Clan and the Wilpsfolk. She grew up in Gitxsan Lax'yip in the village of Haglget beneath the mountain Stekjodin, and they have dedicated the last decade of their life to community organizing and frontline direct action, and are currently working in communications for the Lax'yip Firekeepers. So yeah, I'm really grateful and interested to hear what Shaylynn has to share with us. So yeah, with that, I'll pass it over to you, Shaylynn.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks so much for having me on. Um, yeah, I feel like it would have been nice to have some more firekeepers with me, but everyone's getting super busy with the field season coming up, and we spend a lot of time out on the land. Um, but my name is Shaylynn Sampson. I come from the Lax'yip Wilpsfolk, and I grew up in Hegelget, which is one of the Gitxsan villages on Gitxsan Lax'yip, and um, yeah, it's really nice to be able to come here and talk to you. For me, I spent most of my time like growing up in Hazelton, which is known as Gitxsan Lax'yip, but Hazelton is kind of the colonial name for it. And I mean, it's always been crazy beautiful. It's always been like just lush and gorgeous. And I think as a young person, I kind of just felt trapped a little bit being in the north and so disconnected from like larger city spaces. And so it took me going away and going to school and eventually like dropping out of school, moving back home to really find my way um, back to the Lax'yip and back to community organizing there. I was able to spend 5 years on Wet'suwet'en, helping them fight against the Coastal GasLink pipeline before I moved back to Hazelton or to the Lax'yip. And, since then I've been doing a lot of organizing with this group that we've created called the Lax'yip Firekeepers. Um, and it's honestly just a beautiful organization, and it's really nice to see so many youth coming together. And so mostly I just want to talk about how we got started, what we've been up to, and kind of this practice that we've come into as firekeepers, and like, finding a new way to organize with one another and finding a new way to just like move forward and be in relationship and in community with one another. And just trying to like, carve out a new way of doing things for ourselves that works better and works against burnout. And, I think these are kind of our big priorities, really. Um, so we started in August of 2024. There was a community meeting that was held by a bunch of youth that came together and basically had decided that it was really important that we came together to talk about a project that's proposed to go through our territory called the Prince Rupert Gas Transmission. And so the gas transmission is running from Alberta or Eastern BC to, it used to be to Prince Rupert, and now it's through the Niska territory, and so it cuts directly between our territory. And this is a project that's over a decade old. All the environmental assessments are over a decade old. Things have like really changed in the environmental world um, over the last decade, and so people are really concerned about how this project is moving forward, and basically has been revived after being dropped for a number of years. Um, and now it's coming back with all of these old certificates, and we haven't considered how things have changed, how the route has changed, and how that changes the way that the environment through our Lax'yip will be impacted. And so about like 15 or 20 youth came together and were basically voluntold by like some members of our community that we needed to, you know, host a big discussion with our community about this. And over 300 people came. 300 people from like our very small community of about like 5,000 people. And so it was a really massive convergence. And since then, um, the youth just decided to keep coming together and seeing that this was like an evident need in our community, that we needed to have youth that were willing to speak up, and that our elders and our people just older than us were really inspired to see that youth were willing to take on that work. And it really lit a spark under people. And so There has been already resistance to the Prince Rupert gas transmission, or PRGT, and I think just this youth movement has kind of reinvigorated things, and people are feeling really, really, um, yeah, just excited about protecting our territory. And that's kind of the start of the Firekeepers. That's what first happened. And then we just kept moving, and honestly, it's been just over a year now since we started the org, like as a society. And um, a lot of the first year, we really focused on relationship building. That felt like a really big part of what we needed to do. Our work is like primarily youth centered. It's primarily Gitxsan centered. It The organization is for anyone under 35 that lives on Gitxsan Lax'yip, and also like has lived on Gitxsan Lax'yip or has a long-standing connection through their family or through, being settled on Gitxsan Lax'yip. And so it's really opening. I think the hope for it is that, like, being in a small northern place, there isn't often a lot of opportunity for youth um, to go out and be on the land or go out and experience relationships with other like nearby nations, and all of these like kind of things that I've been able to do now, but I wouldn't have been able to do when I was much younger. Um, so yeah, a lot of our work is just centered around getting youth the resources to like be on the land, to learn more about their culture and all these types of things. Um, to be on the land, really, it's been amazing because we've been able to establish some community partnerships with like Gitxsan Watershed Authority and local elders that have been taking us out onto the land and doing like vegetation surveys of proposed crossing sites for the pipeline, and water quality testing, and also just learning like the medicinal um, uses of our traditional plants that are on the territory. And so being able to take youth out there and even just being able to learn this myself, it's been like an honor. And it just shows you like how much history is all around us if we have like the skills to see it. Um, Another really big part of the work that we've been doing over the last year, um, we were invited to witness a cultural burn last spring on Gitxsan territory. And this is about like 45 minutes down the highway from us. But um, yeah, we were invited to go witness a cultural burn, and it really got a bunch of us excited about the prospect of stewarding our land through fire. Because this is a thing that Gitxsan people have done forever, is using low intensity fire to manage, um, the wilderness around us. And it also helps in regenerating seeds and, just rejuvenating our traditional foods that we would use. And so over the last year, there's been a group of about 15, maybe 20 of us that have gotten um, all trained up. We've done a bunch of fire certifications, probably over 60 hours of training in the last year. And so for this spring, we were able to help on our first cultural burns ever as a crew. And so I think there were 3 or 4 cultural burns that happened this year, and we were able to have our own crew and be able to be out there and kit it out and helping with the firefighters and with the Gitxsan fire stewardship team. And that was kind of a major focus for this spring, was yeah, getting out on the land and maintaining certain areas of our Lax'yip through fire. And this is good for a number of reasons. It also like helps in wildfire prevention. If the fuels that are on the ground have already been burned, then it makes it a lot easier to manage when wildfires come through. Um, yeah, and I think I mentioned this already, but relationship building has been like a massive part of this year. We really didn't want to rush things. We're all very young still, and I know that when you're doing organizing work, especially around the environment, there's so much urgency tied to it, and there's so much fear. that it can make you want to go really, really fast in like organizing and responding to things. But we really wanted to prioritize, kind of taking things slow and building out those relationships and learning how to even work together, and learning what the firekeepers even could be. And so we took some time. We did some strategic planning of like, what are our goals this year? What do we want to do? And this time last year, everything was volunteer based essentially. And now we have two hired full-time staff, and we have another person that's joining us for the summer. And um, we worked on this thing called the Respectful Relations Protocol, which was like one of the first major things that we wanted to work on. It essentially just outlines like, what are our expectations when we work together, and how are we going to deal with conflict when conflict comes up? Um, because in any community, in any sort of organizing, conflict will arise. It's inevitable that that will happen. And instead of pretending that that won't happen to us, we wanted to get ahead of it. We wanted to know, hey, how are we going to treat each other when things get hard? And how do we make sure that we all feel heard and respected? And so Gina Mowat, one of our firekeepers, spent a lot of time working on this protocol. And now, for anyone that wants to become a firekeeper, it's like one of our requirements is that you have to agree to the respectful relations protocol. And it's also been helpful because we've gotten to present it to our communities at one of our community events. And it's all over our social media, it's on our website. We share it with most of the groups that we work with to just like let them know that this is the standpoint we're coming from, and this is how we want to be treated, and that we're not accepting any treatment that is lesser than, and that we get to be in a position to do that because we are, prioritizing our wellness. And one thing that's been really beautiful about this too is that rejecting that urgency means that we ask for help from one another instead of like pretending to push or pretending that we're okay and pushing through and ultimately ending up in burnout. We can now ask each other for help or say, hey guys, I need some space. I just need to back away. Can someone pick up these tasks for me? And I think that's like something that's become really beautiful in our group, is that instead of like, pushing past it all the time, we have a chance and the vulnerability with one another to ask for help. Um, yeah. And so this year has been a lot of that. And we're really excited. We keep building out more and figuring out new things. This is like our first summer with staff on board. And so I think that will change things a lot and help a lot. Um, Most of the firekeepers right now are starting their field work, and so that's with the Gitxsan Watershed Authority, and we often overlap with the Skeena Watershed Conservation Coalition. Um, and so lots of people are going to be out on the land, and I'm sure that like we'll be posting lots of videos and pictures from out there because it's so gorgeous. Um, and yeah, we also have been trying to host like pretty frequently, like at least once a season, community events to talk about the pipeline, to talk about just wellness on the land. We've had like community grief ceremonies with one another, and yeah, so there's a lot of projects that are ongoing for us, and I don't foresee them stopping anytime soon. It's like really the work that we do as a collective is led by the people that are in the collective. And so if there are people that are passionate about certain things, we have like a really wide array of people with so many different skill sets, ranging from like counselors to fish biologists to community organizers. And it's really cute to see how everyone just kind of works together and are using their strengths with one another. Um, for me, because I've spent so much time on front lines and I've had to do a lot of work in media and communications, I feel lucky that I've gotten to take on this role in communications with the firekeepers. But I feel like it also just exemplifies that we're like really trying to build up the youth in our collective to be able to do work that feels important to them, that plays to their strengths and being able to help them grow. Um, yeah, I do want to talk a bit about PRGT. Um, I think I did mention it earlier. Um, but I think what's really important to note is that the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en in the 80s and 90s, of course, were involved with the Delgamuukw court case, in which it was found by the Supreme Court that we had never ceded or surrendered any of our territory. Um, in the last 10 years, of course, we've seen on Wet'suwet'en Yinta the impacts of a pipeline being pushed through. Um, and mind you, these are like two nations that have a really unique position in terms of legal standing on their sovereignty with the Canadian courts. And so to see a pipeline so aggressively pushed through with Wet'suwet'en Yinta, and now we're seeing that immediately come um, to our neighboring territory, people are worried about the impacts that that will have because we've seen what happens to the rivers on Wet'suwet'en Yinta after the crossings and the runoff in the spring. It just is devastating to people, and water that you used to be able to drink 12 months out of the year, minus like maybe 2 weeks. Now you can't drink for up to 4 months in a year. Um, and so there's just like impacts like this. And PRGT, the company, of course, is saying that there won't be any impacts on salmon, and our like fish biologists that like work with us are telling us there will absolutely be impacts to salmon. And so we're just concerned about these things. Right now, PRGT does not have a final investment. Um, and I think that that is something that's really notable is that they are still caught up in fights in the courts. The Kispiox Valley Community Association and Kispiox Band, um, along with Skeena Watershed Conservation Coalition, all just um, went to court with PRGT saying that their essentially their environmental assessment should be redone. And yeah, so I'm just waiting to hear back more really from Shannon and Jesse, who run Skeena Watershed Conservation Coalition, to tell me about, how is that impacting the bigger picture of things? Because we know that they don't have a final investment, and that is actually like really beneficial to us right now because that means that they can't start their construction fully on our territory until they get that investment. And while they're caught up in court, um, I feel like that is like less likely, but not impossible for them to get a final investment. Yeah, I think in looking back at the Wet'suwet'en fight as well, you can see how industry and government love to pit Indigenous people against one another. And we're seeing that attempt being made in our community as well. Um, you know, PRGT would love for Gitxsans to be fighting each other instead of fighting them. And I think as young people, we're just seeing this pattern play out of every time big industry comes through and there are people that are against it and there are people that are for it. It's that fight that takes over rather than a fight against, the environmental regulations that are happening and all of these other like moving parts of capitalism and of, um, industry. So I think that, yeah, as young people, we're just really practicing refusal of this urge and this narrative that we need to be fighting one another. And I feel like it's similar when, capitalists and like billionaires want to pit the working class against one another because of these like small differences when really we're more alike than we'll ever be to those billionaires or the people running these companies or these projects that are proposed to go through our territories. And so I think as young people, we're really trying to like have empathy and recognize that Indigenous people were pushed into poverty for a reason and we're being pitted against each other for a reason. And I think it's really important to stand in some integrity about, not blaming one another, but also still having our boundaries, still knowing that we have to choose differently if we want to preserve life on our territory. And so I think, yeah, as we go through this, we just are trying to practice a lot of like just not villainizing one another. I think that is like the most important part. And we see this like on the left, just in general, like it's so easy to fight one another when there is just like a bigger, farther enemy that needs a lot of attention as well. And I'm not saying that we need to like bend to people that we like slightly agree with or slightly disagree with as well, but it is important to recognize and remember like there are bigger enemies to fight, and like a lot of time the conflict we have with one another is just difference, and it's fine to have difference. um, yeah, and I think that we're really trying to just build some new futures, some futures where, you know, we can have conflict with one another and that is okay, and actually coming through conflict with each other makes us stronger in relationship. um, that is kind of like one of the big missions of our group right now. And we've been doing just like a big awareness campaign. It's really important because people that are for the pipeline and the pipeline company itself are really pushing a narrative in which they're saying that there is no opposition to this project. Um, when for people who live in our communities, we know that there's a large amount of opposition and there's a lot of questions and there are a lot of people on the fence. Um, and so for us this last year, it's been a lot of like going to different places and talking about this project and why it is bad for our environment and how they're pitting us against one another and all of these different things. And also just spreading the word and, you know, asking people to do the same and finding ways for people to support the work that we do. Um, I think it's, you know, really commendable when folks want to come out to the Lax'yip and help out and be there. And I think it's also really amazing if you find ways to organize where you are. You know, there's a lot of strength in like staying in your community and building out, um, you know, communities of resistance in the work that you're doing. um, yeah, I think it's just really integral that we keep on that fight and we keep organizing and um yeah, you know, it and also take the time to prioritize um yourself and finding ways to make that work um help you as well. For me, I think it's really, if I wasn't doing this work, I wouldn't be honest to who I am as a person. And I always feel like um you know, I hear people say like they don't have a choice in doing this work. It's like they have to do it. And I feel like there's just a lot more autonomy and like strength and knowing that this is the work that you choose. You know, like if I could easily not choose to do this work and to, you know, run through the realms of capitalism and government, and I'd probably do very well there if I wanted to. Um, but if I did that, I wouldn't feel like myself and I wouldn't be true to myself. And so if you have a way to find that for yourself, I just encourage people to, you know, find the true calling in all of this, and recognize that no matter where you are, even if you're in a city or if you're in the bush, like there is a connection to land if you're willing to seek it out. You know, we all rely on the land in some way or another. And for me, I'm lucky enough to live um, well, I split my time, but I'm lucky enough to live like on my territory for the most part, and I have a deep historical relationship with that place. But even if you're a newcomer or haven't been here for very long, like wherever you live, you have a responsibility to that place, and whoever is your community, you have a responsibility to those people. And for us, we're just looking forward for the next 7 generations. How do we have something to leave behind? And for us, we consider Gitxsan Lax'yip, you know, the greatest inheritance of all. And so it's something that we are fighting really hard to protect, and something that has been like really the center of this whole thing is like we are always thinking about the children, we're always thinking about the land. And I think that's kind of, um, you know, the easiest way to sum up our framework. Um, but yeah, I think that's where I'll kind of end that part. People have questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Especially when you're talking about like maintaining this relationship and following like a calling. I think that that's super important that people may not maybe not everybody can do it, but we want people to really think about where they're putting their time and their energy, and hopefully it's towards something that they believe in. Um, yeah, so thank you so much. I did want to clarify, I guess, just like a couple questions before I open it up to everyone. So my understanding with the pipeline is that it was started or it was approved like 10 years ago, and they didn't really do any work on it until their environmental assessment was going to expire after a certain period of time. So they did like a little bit of work to make sure that it doesn't expire so they don't have to get an assessment again. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. They had like a date that it had to be substantially started by, I feel like in like November of last year, I want to say. And they did like literally like the tiniest amount of work because they were only able to work on one of the sections of the pipeline, which was very small just in general. Um, and so they cut the right of way, which is like where the pipeline is supposed to go, and put a few man camps out there, but I've heard that they were like all empty. And the right of way was like half the size that it needed to be. And I flew over it actually in a helicopter, and I saw like they were only doing like flat sections and like, yeah, just half the size or the width that it was meant to be. And they didn't do like any of like the slopes or any of the like creek crossings or anything. So like it was really like an insultingly little amount of work that they had done, and they still got approved for the substantial start. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah, that is like why SWCC and like Kispiox are in court as well, as like they're opposing the substantial start decision.
right. Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense too, because I imagine 10 years ago, like the environmental assessment would be probably different than what it was or what it is now after like 10 years of potentially added regulations and, potentially more money that they have to spend on this impact assessment. So all these sorts of things. So yeah, I guess it makes sense on their end to like do some kind of half-assed work, to kind of push it through. But yeah, so that's definitely very interesting. And then something else that I wanted to ask you is, at the beginning you were talking a lot about burnout. And, I find that really interesting that that's like such a central part of especially like a youth organization, just because as youth, typically you're like, okay, this is my time to build and to go. And so I'm curious, like, why do you have this focus on burnout? Is it from because you were saying you were doing like land defense work for years prior?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like um if I had been asked it like 5 years ago, I wouldn't have cared. Like I wouldn't have had such a focus on it. But I started land defense work in like about a decade ago. Like I was fresh out of high school. I was going to university in Victoria, and started getting pulled into things. And I feel like at that time I felt like really like alive doing that work and unstoppable. And um, I was involved in the ledge occupation here in Victoria, where we like occupied the BC legislature front steps for like 3 weeks in 2020. And um, pretty much immediately, and I got arrested there. That was kind of like the first kind of like major intensity of it all, is that I was arrested alongside five other youth. Um, and there was a lot of stuff going on then because lots of people were popping off in solidarity with Wet'suwet'en. Obviously, that was the year shut down Canada. Um, and then I moved up to the Yinta, and I spent like 5 years out on the Yinta, and just got so incredibly burnt out. And like there's a number of other firekeepers that were involved in like various degrees, like a few down here at the ledge, a few in other places. And like I think each one of us got severely hit by burnout at one point or another. For me, it was like in 2021 after the Coyote Camp blockades. Um, I was arrested and like placed in jail for 5 days, and I just finished court for that this fall, and so I was in court for like 4 years for that particular arrest and like yeah occupation project. And so I got incredibly burnt out and like the kind of burnout that people warn you about. And I remember around that time I was working with Indigenous climate action, and shout out Erin, I saw that you're on here. um, and yeah, I remember talking with Melina Lubicon Massimo, who's an organizer um, in Alberta and like a really amazing woman. And she was talking about burnout to me and was just like, you really need to prioritize your health. And like, not when it gets really bad, you need to like see it beforehand. And so I think a few of us just had really similar experiences and like knew what it was like to be community organizers, especially like young Native people organizing, and we get pulled in all these ways from NGOs that like want us to come talk for them or come talk to them, and like all of these things that end up being like over and over again. It ends up feeling like quite extractive. Um, and so I think we just really prioritized when we were making that document, like the respectful relations protocol, like talking about burnout and being really cognizant that it can happen so quickly and so easily. Um, yeah, I think it's just like people experiencing that and knowing it, and like really as we come together and organize again and recognizing like this could be a whole other pipeline fight, like just as long as the fight on the Yinta, like another decade of this work, and that this is like a marathon of work and not a sprint, and we are just trying to protect one another and recognize that like we can still try and protect one another and we'll probably still get burnt out, or we'll probably like someone among our crew will get burnt out, but we're trying to build systems where if one person falls, then we can help them back up instead of all of us just getting burnt out. And we've all been in like organizing scenes that like people are so burnt out, triggered, and traumatized that, when conflict arises, our bandwidth is so low and there's like a whole community collapse because of it. And so I think we're just really trying to protect each other against that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, yeah, we have to like maintain this mental capacity to fight these big fights and also, enjoy our lives a little bit on along the way too. Um,
Totally.
Barry, if you wanted to ask a question.
But Shaylin, I thank you for your presentation, which was so informative and well, heartbreaking at the same time. So I've got a binary question. How do you feel when you see the Mark Carney Liberal government spend billions of dollars more on pipelines, fighter jets, and soldiers for NATO than on water bombers and firekeepers? And it's connected to this part as well. Forests can be regenerated, but are forests on Turtle Island keeping pace with the wildfires or tragically losing ground to devastating destruction, and at what rate? Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like for me, and maybe this is just like the community organizer for over a decade in me, is I just feel so jaded towards the government in general, and especially being like a young Indigenous person and like aware of the history of the government in North America. Um, I just have so little faith in Mark Carney in general. Not that what he's doing isn't abhorrent. It's just like I don't expect anything more than him from him. That he is like prioritizing war and greed and capitalism over human lives and the health of the earth. It's just like what all of his predecessors have done over and over again since the beginning of colonization on Turtle Island. Um, because they see the land as a commodity. They just see it as something that is like not important in the grand scheme of things. And I think that's what is like so heartbreaking about it all, is that like for us, the land is like a relative. The land is like something so important to us. Um, but I feel like seeing my community and their efforts to like fight back against that, and like all of the amazing cultural firework that is happening on Gitxsan Lax'yip. And it's like a growing movement of this happening as well in other places, like especially in BC. I see it more and more coming up, and like along the West Coast and in the States, that people are really seeing the importance of cultural burning, not only because it like regenerates the forests and helps, um, in like biodiversity and pyrodiversity, but it also is just like a huge help in terms of wildfire protection. Like I said earlier, like it makes the intensity of the fire lower because it has less available fuel, and it makes um, yeah, just the area of containment and like the transfer of wildfire, or the growth of wildfire, like less intense. And so I think that that's something that's really cool. And like as someone that over a year ago just didn't know anything about fire, seeing like not only myself but also like so many of my peers just be able to like actually acquire that knowledge. And like we were able to get some grants that helped in the funding of our cultural fire program, but it really just took like the dedication of like maybe 5 people to get everyone trained, and to get everyone, kitted out, and to get everyone like actually there on the land. And it was just like building those connections. And so I feel like seeing like a community-led response to wildfires, even though like the government should be doing more, obviously, um, being able to see like people that I know and care about, like with the same values, working on it from that angle. It's been really, really heartwarming to see that part.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you. Fargo, if you want to unmute yourself and ask.
Sure. Hi, Shaylynn. Thank you so much for the presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, just checking. I have a couple questions. One, can you either now or before the end of this discussion share with the panel where we can donate, if that's something we can do? Secondly, if we can provide labor, who do we contact? And thirdly, if this organization, the Firekeepers, have different chapters across the country, maybe you could name some of them that we can seek out independently if we're in the region to reach. And the other question is, um, uh, uh, what can you, maybe this is a little bit of a detraction, and forgive me if it is. What are your thoughts on Wap Canoe and his career so far as premier in Saskatchewan, and his relationship with
Manitoba.
excuse me?
Manitoba.
Yes, right, correct. And also there was a recent, at the beginning of the year at the Red River, there was a mass displacement in southern Manitoba near the Red River, where I think upwards between 2,500 and 3,500 Indigenous men, women, and children were displaced. And I remember seeing the conference. It was heartbreaking to see one of the chiefs explain that their call out to hotels across Manitoba, they were met, and he said this, they replied verbatim saying that we don't want you up here. And if you could comment on that, and what it means for Canada in the 21st century to still be aggressively displacing the Indigenous and First Nations. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, first I'll respond to the first part, is that I just sent in the chat. I think Lax'yip.com is kind of our Firekeepers website, and so there's a bunch of information on there. We're also on all social media. Um, I can send my new email in the chat as well. We've just been like working out the kinks of our like org getting our own emails, and so it's been kind of I've been missing emails everywhere. But that's kind of the best way to get a hold of us. My cousin Norman Sampson is the administrator for Firekeepers, and so he checks our administrator email. And then I just started in the comms position, and so I'll be doing. Well, I'll have like a communications email sorted out soon. But we also just have like a bunch of information on our website, and through our social media pages. And so that's kind of the best way to reach us. Yeah, I feel like I don't actually know a ton about Wabkanu. I know that he is like in politics and in Manitoba, and um I feel like I again just like in colonial politics as a whole, I feel like even when good people go into colonial like politics roles, it is unfortunate, but they end up in the electoral politics like realm. And so they're always like, seeking out that next election and thinking about like how are they going to get there and like what values can they waver on in order to get reelected. And I feel like that's just incredibly problematic where like we just have this way of government in Canada and all over the world really that like you're constantly trying to um figure out what values you can waver on. Like I don't really support that in general. And like for me to uphold my values, I would never go into electoral politics. And I understand that like lots of people feel like there's like a need to make a change from the inside. Um, but that's just not really where I stand as a person. Um, yeah, it's really complicated though. People really want to make a change for their communities. And this is what I've been saying with like folks in our communities that like want these projects to go through. Like even though I disagree with them, like we are both trying to make moves for our future generations and like we have different means in doing so, but like um it's just complicated, to be in those positions and being indigenous in colonial governance is like not an easy thing to do. Like I would hate to be in that position. But yeah, I think that there is still so much racism in Canada. Canada like loves to pretend that we're like really good guys, like the government is like really good and so friendly and whatever, and we're like known around the world for that. But the treatment of Indigenous people and like people of color in general in Canada has been terrible. It's so horrible to see even at present day. Um, the fact that for defending Indigenous land, like me and my sister Slato, who's also my mentor, we were held at gunpoint. We were put in jail for 5 days for being on her territory, defending her land, or like her family's land, and that we've had like an ancient connection to, and people like to pretend that there's no racism there, but it's all just like just below the surface, barely, and so for like Native people still being displaced in Canada, that's so evident and clear, it's really, really obvious how racist this country still is. Um, and to try to deny that would just be untrue. And people try to deny it all the time. I was talking about today the amount of residential school deniers there still are. And it's like a growing movement, actually. And I cannot believe that because, like, I know, like, both my grandpas went to residential school. They went to Lejac Indian Residential School, just outside Fraser Lake. And my grandma, my Zitzi, she went to the Indian Day School in Hazelton. And, they have all these stories about what happened and how horrible those schools were, and people still don't believe them. And it's been like, like over 30 years since the last one's closed in Canada, and people are still like denying it, even though there's so many experiences that have come forward. Um, so yeah, I feel like Canada is a country that's founded on genocide, and it continues to pretend that it wasn't, over and over again. And so it's no wonder that they're still racist. And I said this like also when I was like giving testimony in my trial that the treatment of the police towards Indigenous people, the over incarceration, like all of these reasons, it's like I'm not shocked that Canada behaves this way, but it is still like horrible. But what's really sad is that it's not surprising.
Yeah, thank you.
May I just tag something on to that if we have time, an extra minute?
Sure.
I just wanted to ask, well, first of all, I've worked in 4 countries, and I can tell you in my experience as a brown dude with a beard, Canada is exponentially more racist than any other country, and that includes the United States. It's not even, it's not comparable. It's very overt here. The question, so, in this organization, capitalism can't be fixed. Um, there's always been a debate about whether we collaborate or cooperate with different political parties. And in from what I've seen, especially regarding Indigenous rights and First Nations rights throughout Canada, this has been the colonial parliamentary system is designed to exclude the Indigenous and First Nations. In your view, do you think that there is any path forward in working with federal or provincial, or in a lot of cases, municipal governments as well, or whether this is going to be the only resolution, or the significant portion of the resolution is going to come from grassroots movements like the Firekeepers and other organizations that have popped up in the last decade?
I think, I mean, maybe it's possible that larger scale things can happen. I think that it is much more attainable to think that like in your community, in your region, that grassroots communities will make life more livable and able to protect the environment better than the government does now. Um, and for me, what I'm always fighting for is Gitxsan sovereignty. And Gitxsan sovereignty doesn't mean signing a treaty with the government, and it doesn't mean, like being recognized by the government. Because also we've done that, like the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en, they went to court to have their, sovereignty recognized, that we had never ceded or surrendered our land. And even though we've done that, 30 years later, there's nothing to show for it. The government tried to push us into treaty negotiations, and we said we didn't want to sign a treaty. And this is where we are now. They're just pushing projects through without our consent anyway. Um, and so I feel like I don't put a lot of trust in them. And I think just like over and over again, Indigenous people have been like very trusting of provincial and federal governments in a way that they don't deserve it all. Um, and that's like more of a my personal take than perhaps a firekeeper's take. But yeah, I don't choose to put my energy or my trust in the government because over and over again, they've abused the trust, and their organizations as like federal and provincial governments were built upon the genocide of our people. And so I don't feel like I need to like prove myself to them. I think that like nation to nation relationships are really important, like the Gitxsan and the Wet'suwet'en have an ancient alliance that predates colonization on our territories. And so building out that relationship has always meant a lot to me, and is like the primary reason I spent so long on the Yinta. And you know just youth connecting with youth from other nations, like we've heard from youth that are along the PRGT route as well, that like um they don't want this project to go through either, but in lots of cases there are just like a few people that sign on to the project, and there's like young people all over that are concerned about this. And so we're really working on like how do we build out relationships with like other sovereign indigenous people and other allies that like believe in this cause as well. And so that's where I would put my energy. I'm not going to say it's like impossible because anything is possible, but I don't really foresee like myself, and I don't really foresee the firekeepers like pursuing like work with the provincial or federal governments in general. Like maybe municipal. I think municipal politics actually can like be really helpful, and like, you know, it's like can be local enough that it can matter. But once it gets bigger than that, I feel like it's just like kind of there's just like just one person speaking on behalf of so many when it gets bigger than that. And I just feel like it's hard for one person to contain all of that. Um, like for our governance structure, um, we have like clans, and then within a clan, there are house groups, which are essentially family groups. And then each house group has like a house chief, and that person is the speaker of the house. And so they will like speak in the feast hall any of decisions that the house is making. But beyond that is like right beside him, there's advisors. And so we have chiefs that are like called wing chiefs, and they're the advisors. And so all of the people in the house will gather in like a house meeting and they discuss the big issues, and everyone has a say. and then the wing chiefs will advise the house chief, and then the house chief will tell everyone else what the decision is. But that's not how government works as a whole in Canada. It would be really nice if that were the case, but it's not. Um, so yeah, I think that it for me, I like want to prioritize like Gitxsan sovereignty and governance over, you know, external governance structures.
Mm-hmm. Francis, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, my name is Francis Fruin. I welcome all pronouns. I grew up with Wet'suwet'en, and then I was on Homelands for 8 years, studying at UBC. And I just moved home, and I'm really excited to be home and recover from burnout. And I'm really curious, Shaylynn, for us, especially here in the Zoom with you or other folks, what would you recommend as, like as an Indigenous scholar and land defender, what would you recommend everyone reads or listens to or watches um, from other Indigenous folks to help us understand what meaningful relations would be, especially like Indigenous settler relations?
It's a great question. Well, if you haven't seen it, watch Yinta. I make a cameo, but um, Yinta is the documentary that follows the Wet'suwet'en over the last decade, fighting against 13 different pipeline projects, not just Coastal GasLink. Yeah, that is like an incredible movie. A movie that literally changed my life was Kanasatake, 270 Years of Resistance, which is covers the Oka crisis and follows Ellen Gabriel, who's my hero. Amazing woman. And for reading, um, there's a beautiful piece called Water Falling on Granite. It's a reflection on Fairy Creek and um, this thing called deference politics. And I talk about this all the time. Like people in my life are probably sick of how often I talk about this scene. Um, but I think it just really hits the nail on the head about a few things that happen in like frontline action kind of circles where often people just want to defer um, to like an Indigenous person or a Black person or a queer person on certain things instead of like developing and having their own meaningful values around things. Um, and we see this like around cancel culture and identity politics where people like really will play up their identity to like have different treatment. I've just like seen this and experienced this so many times where like people will flock to me or to my sisters or to like other people in like frontline, like who are perceived as like important in terms of like frontline direct action. Um, and they just want to like attach themselves to your identity or like put you on a pedestal. And I find it like incredibly dehumanizing to be put on a pedestal because, you know, when you're in that position, often you're not seen as like a full person, you're seen as an idealized version of like what people want you to be. And I think that what is much more meaningful and what makes really strong movements is everyone coming to a fight for their own reason, not because you think someone else has a good idea and you want to follow it. It's like, why does it align with your values? Why is this your fight as well as mine? Because, you know, um, my identity as like a Gitxsan person can be completely separate from like a settler identity or like other identities that have been oppressed in the past. And I think that like our liberation is still tied up in one another. And I have my own reasons for being there. And if you have your own reasons for being there, then we get to fight alongside one another. But if you're putting me on a pedestal or Indigenous people on a pedestal as someone that is like more possible to do that work than you, then you're giving up some of your autonomy. You're giving up like your own ability to do those things because you think that someone else can do it better. And I think that that is just kind of a cop out often, you know, to leave it to someone else to do the hard thinking about it without like having to like interrogate yourself and interrogate your bias or you know all of these other kinds of things and I think that that can be like kind of a hard pill to swallow but Water Falling on Granite kind of talks about this. And also Settlers on the Red Road by Twinnike is an amazing zine. And yeah, it kind of just talks about a lot of similar things. Reconciliation is Dead by Twinnike or Twinnike. Also an amazing read. It's very short. It was wrote in 2020. And it was just talks about like reconciliation is this idea and this tool um, used by like colonial forces and government to co-opt like, you know, reparations that ought to be owed to Indigenous people, of course, but um, reconciliation is dead just like talks about like we can't continue to rely on the state to make reconciliation happen. Um, and that it's like actually really in our own hands to like see how that's been used as a tool against us as well. Mm, yeah, I feel like those are like kind of my top four. The movie Yinta, um, about Wet'suwet'en resistance. My sister Jen Wickham co-directed that. And my other sister, Slato, is like one of the key like people in it. And then Kanasatake, 270 Years of Resistance on the Oka Crisis, amazing film. Settlers on the Red Road, Water Falling on Granite, and Reconciliation is Dead. So
Thank you.
Yinta, Yinta is the Wet'suwet'en word for um, territory or like land.
Hmm. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
like, oh, sorry, are you wanting to respond?
Oh, I was I was going to say thank you, and um, I had not heard of deference politics, and I really appreciate you sharing your perspective and a little bit of lived experience on it, um, and it's helpful for myself to apply to some other things too. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was gonna, sorry, I put myself on the speaker list. I think like your organization does a really good job of showing like land defense beyond just like opposing a project, which is something really interesting and that maybe we don't think about as much. But you're kind of like you're talking a lot about like resurging your community, this like, it kind of brought your community together, but now you're learning about like the cultural burns, and you're saying that you're like actually paying people through this organization, which is so nice. And I can only imagine like I'm from Comox on Vancouver Island, and like there's even less jobs there, and it's very close to Victoria. So I can't even imagine for, where you are in BC. So to be able to have like young people to come back and work is a huge accomplishment. So I mean, congratulations on that and on your project. I am curious, like, so our organization, I mean, we've created this policy book last year. We have, we did talk with like Ellen Gabriel and a lot of different Indigenous peoples in developing this policy book. Um, but now we have these policies, but what do we necessarily do with them? And as we go forward as an organization, I guess I'm curious, like, what are like meaningful alliances? Like, what would that look like to you? If like capitalism can't be fixed, were to be supportive, or like if we were to collaborate in the future, like what are you looking for? Because you said at the beginning, you can come here, but you were kind of saying on the other hand, like, don't come here. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of curious, like, what you have to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I mean things like that I really like appreciate. There's been a lot of folks that have reached out that are just like we care about what the firekeepers are doing. We want you to come to our community and like tell us more about it, or we would want you to be on this panel to talk about PRGT, or we want you to like, people that see us as like expert sort of witnesses on like our experience and like want us to elaborate on how we feel that relates to the rest of the world. I feel like that is like really important and like is a part of that like world building around like why is it important to you as well.
Mhm.
And like at the beginning of the fight on Wet'suwet'en Yinta, um, like Frida Hallcat, like Frida Houston, like one of the most famous Wet'suwet'en of all time, I'd say. She like traveled around all over the place doing like speaking tours and talking to people and like people feel like a connection to that land when you hear about it, you know, and when you watch the film and when you get to go there. And I'm not saying like don't ever come to Gitxsan Lax'yip. Obviously, it's like a beautiful place that everyone should see in their lifetime. Um, but it's like build out why you have that connection, and like I think that's in doing the research, and that's in hearing more, and like hearing like testimony from people like me and other firekeepers and other elders from our territory, on why that's like all important.
Yeah, okay. We did have Sophia on the speaking list, but I think she took down her hand. I'm just going to answer or ask you some questions that I saw that were in the chat.
Yeah,
Um,
so you out.
yeah, okay. So I'll just speak them all out and you can decide if you want to answer one or any. So mainstream media is reporting that a final investment decision will be made by the end of the year. Do you think that's likely timing? Do you think that the Canadian government will have to subsidize this pipeline in some way for it to move forward? That's one. Are you concerned that the RCMP, CIRG, CRU, BC will be back on the territory, or that they are already there monitoring, surveilling the situation? Maybe you could, if you know what that acronym means, maybe you could say it. And then do you anticipate that maybe at some point in 2027, if the final decision does move forward, that there would be a call for allies to come to the territory, or maybe that people should be organizing in their home communities, sort of like shut down Canada? So that's all of them.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know how likely it is for them to get a final investment decision. I'm like not really in that world and like know a ton about it. But you know, I feel like they're going to, if they really have the will to make this happen and can find the money to do so, like I'm sure that they'll try go ahead. Like it, as much as we try to like have a values-based approach and like try to appeal to like the heartstrings that people have, capitalism doesn't care, you know. Colonial money keeps moving round and round. They like want to make it happen, they will, or they'll like push and push and push. And like CGL, another prime example, but that project was like billions over budget and years behind schedule. They still pushed it through. So I'm sure that if they really want to, they're going to try and make it happen. If the government has to subsidize it, I'm sure they'll try. And yeah, I should have mentioned Surg much earlier. I'm like, those guys are my number one enemies. Um, Surg is the Community Industry Response Group. That's what it's formally known as, and they just recently rebranded, changed their name to Community Response or Crisis Response Unit, Community Response Unit, one of the two. Um, but it was literally a wing of the RCMP that was created to police indigenous movements. It's literally in response to um, Native people blocking pipeline industry infrastructure and whatnot. Um, and so, if you've seen any like police raids that have happened in the last like 5 years, like whether it's from Tiny House Warriors in Secwepemc territory, or out at Fairy Creek, or up on the Yinta, or on Gitxsan Lax'yip, like all of these are carried out by SURG. And so they're the people that arrested all of us in 2021 and 2019, and like over and over again they're just showing up. They were also at a lot of like the pro-Palestine rallies and stuff. They like got to extend like whatever their purpose is so that they could respond to pro-Palestine rallies as well. And they're not just police from BC, they're police from all over the place. Like I remember on the Yinta we were seeing people come all the way out from Montreal and like Saskatchewan and all these different places, and like police of any standing, it was like they volunteer and probably got paid more to go, to be out on the Yinta and police like Indigenous people. And I know at least one of them was one of the lead investigators for Project EPANA, which is like the wing of the RCMP that's supposed to be looking into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And instead of being in his office working on that, he was actually just out on the Yinta harassing Indigenous women for protecting their land. Um, and so they're just like evil. They're really bad. Really bad guys. I am worried about them coming back. Um, And I think that a lot of our community, like even the people that are in our community that are pro pipeline are anti-police. Um, they've like signed agreements with the police to be like, hey, your guys aren't going to do that again, right? But I'm like, we can't trust them. We can't trust that they're not going to like come in with their rifles and their attack dogs and like their like army greens all over the fucking place. And they're just going to like, you know, they're going to be police because that's what police do. So yeah, I think that that is like a really big concern. I'm not sure if they're um already monitoring or surveilling. I'm like I know that I'm probably on one of their lists, but I don't know how much they're like watching the Firekeepers or anything. I'm sure they're like just taking note that there's going to be opposition to this project, and I think we've pretty publicly spoken that um, you know, if the project goes ahead, if they start construction on the Lax'yip, there will be significant opposition. And um, for the last question, like I'm sure that there will be times when we need people on the Lax'yip in the future. Um, I can't speak like directly to it because it's the places that they're crossing like aren't directly my territory, and it will come from, you know, the house groups. Um, but yeah, I'm sure at some point, and like to just stay tuned and like skill up if you can. Um, and that's also in terms of like getting prepared for action in the communities where you reside. Um, there's a lot of things that are like important to know, like having legal observer trainings, making sure your community like knows how to be a legal observer, making sure your community is aware of police tactics or like aware of security culture, like how do police surveil you when you're known to be like against projects. Um, I feel like there's like a lot of good security culture zines out there that I'd like can't name, but um, yeah, I think medic training also really important. I like in the last few years have gotten registered as like oh my gosh, a wilderness first responder, and like a bunch of my friends have also done the same. Like, and like I just see a bunch of people right now getting trained up in medics, and like that is like just a really important skill to have if like things are going down, and like especially in cities, like street medicing is like a really, really important part of like being in the streets and like fighting back. Um, yeah, I think like security culture is like a really, really big part too. And just like sharing that knowledge because it's not like knowledge that you just happen on. It's like you have to seek out the knowledge of security culture. Um, and it's like not always easy. And it took me like a long time of learning. Um, but yeah, I think like people getting trained up to either like be on the land, offer those skills, or if you already have those skills, like how can you offer them? Or like if you're preparing like where you are, there's a lot of like crossover in the skills that you need. And also, I can't believe I took so long to say this, but like conflict resolution is like what I preach everywhere I go, is like it's so important to value like conflict resolution as a skill in your communities and the work that you do. Conflict resolution is like really at the heart of it all. It's like if you're like at war with yourself and your friends, then you're not going to be able to do any meaningful organizing work, or all of that organizing work is going to feel very like fraught. Um, and so I think, you know, just figuring that stuff out is really important. And in the meantime, when you're preparing for all of that, like people have been throwing some really cool events as fundraisers for Firekeepers or for like the dog sanctuary on the Lax'yip. And the dog sanctuary is like a camp set up way out in the bush on the pipeline right of way. And it's literally just like a place where dogs with no homes go. And this woman named Teresa, who's like amazing, has been just like running this dog sanctuary. And then so it's like a sovereignty project, but it's also like literally giving homes to dogs and like fostering them and like finding them fosters and adoptions, and it's like a really cute thing. So lots of people have been like running fundraisers for the Firekeepers or for the dog sanctuary. And they're really cool. I just saw this comedian comment and in the chat and I'm like, we have been seeing comedians and stuff. Like I just went to a variety show in Victoria the other day, And it was truly a crazy variety. And it was just like a little fundraiser. And they sent all of the funds to the Firekeepers. And there was like a person doing a skit. There were drag performances. There were people singing and rapping. It was just like really crazy. And so people have been really creative in like finding ways to support. And so yeah, I feel like that's kind of just like a fun thing people do as well.
Amazing. Well, I think that's all of our like questions. And you were definitely generous with your time, so thank you. Yeah, this was super interesting to hear about. Um, Thank you so much for spending your time with us, letting us know about it, telling about, more personal things as well, like your sister and the burnout, and gave us lots of good resources. Yeah, so we will definitely be watching what the Firekeepers are doing. And if there's ever like some, big move or you guys need support or anything, please feel free to reach out to us. And yeah, I wish you guys the best going forward.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much for having me. Nice chatting with y'all.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Can I make
Um,
an announcement?
yes, you may.
Okay, thank you. Very briefly. For those interested in political education, well, you got some tonight,
Mm.
but there's a educational conference taking place on Saturday, this Saturday, June 13th, sponsored by my organization, Socialist Action, which is one of the founding groups in the Capitalism Can't Be Fixed socialist movement. So there are two sessions. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. The everlasting importance of the Workers' United Front is the topic. I'll be speaking along with Imogen Xavier in Vancouver and Shama Sawant, who is a socialist who was elected 3 times to Seattle City Council and fought for and got the highest minimum wage in America. The 4 o'clock session is called "What is Democratic Centralism?" with speakers Gary Porter in Victoria and Jeff Mackler in San Francisco, Oakland. He's a leader of Socialist Action USA. So 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock. The link is available at the Socialist Action website, um, uh, socialistactioncanada@gmail.com. Sorry for taking so much time, but it's a really invaluable resource that I think people will enjoy. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. And I did just drop some links in the chat as well for donating for our previous sessions on YouTube. And then if you're wanting to volunteer with our organization, then please fill out that volunteer form so we know who to contact when the time is right. And just a final announcement that next week we're going to have a photojournalist in who's from Montreal. His name is William Wilson. And he was just covering the anti-ICE protests in the States, specifically at Delaney Hall, but he's been in a couple other places as well. So he's going to give us a presentation, kind of a report back. So it's going to be super interesting. And then we have in 2 weeks, Bill Carroll coming in, a professor at UVic on eco-socialism. And then after that, it'll be Canada Day, and we're going to do one on Canadian mythology. So that will be Eve's specialty for sure. Yeah. Okay. That's all.
and Cuba down the line.
Down the line next month, we're getting there.
Yep.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye.